Okay, and we are live. So hi everybody, welcome to the Her Hoop Stats Unplugged podcast, back live on Twitter. As always, you're here with Megan Gower and then Aaron Barzilai as well. And then we're joined today by Alexa Philippou. I'm about to butcher that, and I just asked you too.
Philippou, right? Philippou, we said, right?
From the Hypercurrent. Hey Alexa, thanks so much for hopping on, even though I already know your name.
Oh, seriously, all good. Happy to be here and chat some hoops with you guys.
Oh, yeah, it's great to have you here. I will say, like me, do you often just tell people not even to try to pronounce your last name?
I'm always very touched when people really want to actually try and pronounce it correctly. I think that shows, that they care. Often I notice it's people who are used to getting their own last names mixed up. So then I'm like, okay, you understand. But I've gotten to the point where I mind less that people mispronounce my last name. But if they make an Alexa joke, then I'm just I've heard 50 million of these in the last 5 years, right? And they still do it anyway. So
yeah, like an obvious pickup line or something. Yeah. What's the craziest way they'd mispronounce your last name?
I don't even have one off the top of my head. It's just sometimes they add random vowels. Sometimes it's just they add an A in there, which I guess when you pronounce it, it's kind of I pronounce Philippou, even if there's an I there. I've seen it all. But I'm Greek and I'm proud, so
there you go.
That's what I have to go through to be Greek with a very strong Greek last name. Then it works for me.
Yeah, I think the craziest one I've ever gotten is Barcelona. I had my freshman high school basketball coach called me that.
That's a lot of extra letters that are not there.
Not close to your actual last name. It's just the mind skipping a few steps.
So Megan, right? Do you want to try and pronounce my last name very clearly here or not? Should I put you on the spot?
Barzilai, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That is super impressive. Super impressive. But yeah, no, I appreciate you joining us. So you're in Hartford, right? Writing for the Hartford. Now, I always mispronounce this. It's the Current? How would you say your papers?
It's the Current, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that's always a tough one for me. I always want to say Quran. So we're coming to you from Connecticut as well as New Jersey. I was debating, do you think we should ask our viewers that are trying to watch in Florida to wait 14 days and quarantine themselves and then watch it on tape?
If I have to, or there's that new order from the governors, right? You can't, can't that's what you're referring to, right?
Yeah. Exactly. The tables have turned, right? I remember the Florida governor was you can't come.
Right now.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you still can't go to Florida technically, which is kind of ridiculous. I don't think we're high risk anymore. They're high risk, but
And then the WNBA season is supposed to be held there in a month.
Yep.
We'll see.
Yeah. So
I keep waking up. Is today the day they announce they're moving it to Minnesota, or are they going to announce?
It's kind of funny, right? I mean, Mohegan Sun there. I apologize, my internet connection isn't great today. If you had said in March that
we're losing
I think
I feel
so we're Florida. Yeah, so it's such a weird situation. It's crazy how the world works and how things still, are so uncertain.
Yeah, exactly. It seems I guess we'll just see, but the Florida situation is less than ideal. I think what is the latest number I have it there for just Manatee County, which is where IMG is. They're on a new high or up to 68 cases, 7-day average high of 93. 11%, I think, test positive, which is, I think, the number that seems to be what most people say is the one to keep the closest eye on is that percentage, and yeah, not good.
Right. Not great. It's been interesting too, seeing players I know Gabby Williams, obviously. I follow her for UConn stuff too. She and I'm other people too are kind of okay, Florida, we sure you want to do this, and she's playing. She's not one of those that has really come out as, oh, I'm opting out or I'm on the fence. I think she's made it pretty clear she's playing. But I think it's interesting to see too how the players are kind of expressing that concern publicly.
Yeah, it makes sense. probably the worst off state in the country right now. There's probably a couple that are in the running for that, but basically,
yeah, what want to be there, like Arizona, like
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm from Arizona, and yes, my parents still live there, and it's crazy. I think the thing that's actually really interesting in some of the stories that I've seen, I mean, obviously so much of it's interesting, but I think in Arizona they're at like they're definitely like having trouble testing again. Like they don't have enough testing capacity. I guess part of that the New York Times said was because they've been doing these drive-up outdoor testing sites, but now it's like 110 degrees, and so they can't have the workers standing out there. But nevertheless, they don't have, even so the labs don't have the testing capacity, and so it's kind of going back to March when it would take like a week, and so like you could still spread it. And so I think that's also something super important to monitor. I think one of the things we're going to talk about is Michelle Vopel's reporting today and the bubble in general. And I mean, there's definitely a chance that like the testing capacity in Florida could be strained, which would make the whole thing, really, really hard to pull off.
Yeah, I forget exactly what the details were in her article, but I think it was something like 3 tests before they head off to Florida, and then like a test once they get there. And it sounds like tests basically daily for like 2 weeks, and then it eases off.
That was actually not that we have to like jump into it right now if you don't want to, but I was kind of curious why they're like, oh, well, testing for 2 weeks. I guess it's like really comes down to supply. Maybe you don't need to test every day for 2 weeks, but I guess I was just like left wondering what it's going to look like after that time. They said, like, I think the word she used is like periodically, which to me is like, okay, like every few days, every few weeks. So I'm curious if there's a solidified kind of plan for that. That just like wasn't delved into or what that looked like. Cause obviously they're going to be there from end of July to October in theory, right? So that's like
beginning of July.
Right. Beginning of July, actually. Yeah. I was thinking season. So it's a long time to be somewhere. So you think they have to keep up with the testing pretty regularly. I'm not a doctor, so
yeah, me neither. So obviously,
did you stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night though, or not?
Fortunately not. So welcome through there.
one of my favorite ads. But a lot of questions from what Michelle reported on, right? A lot of unanswered questions. We had written that article Bailey did with a lot of questions we had. And that's part of what we wanted to talk to you about today. The one thing that stuck out to me, I mean, I think there's no question that everyone's doing their best. It's an incredibly hard problem. And everyone's making a good faith effort to try and come up with a way to make it successful. The detail that really jumped out at me though from reading it was the idea that they're only going to quarantine for 4 days when they arrive. That was really surprising, and I'm curious. I am curious what that means, because I'm under the impression that they're probably all going to fly commercial, and so like if they're getting on a plane potentially exposed, are they going to quarantine by themselves in their own rooms, or are they still going to gather together as a team, in case, to isolate from just one person catching it versus the whole team spreading to the whole team? And like, how did they pick 4 days? Everything I've read, the 14-day guideline that we've seen in the news, my understanding is that if you're going to be symptomatic, like 97% of the people that are symptomatic in 14 days. And, it's like an S curve. So I think it's around 7 days, at which point the majority of people that are going to be symptomatic are in fact symptomatic. So 4 days struck me as really quick. I mean, the testing will help, but nevertheless, it seemed odd.
Right. Yeah, the other thing I was thinking about, kind of along those similar lines, is especially now you start to see, and I know players are starting their individual workouts. I'm not sure if they've been tested at this point. I'm not sure if you guys have heard anything. Have you?
Have not, no.
So, for example, like the media talk this week with Sun players, I think there's 6 of them we talked to. So they're doing individual workouts, but then I've also seen some like on Instagram that are like not quite socially distancing. So I'm just like, okay. I mean, maybe, if you're quarantined and you're tested and it's like fine, like, I don't know. I don't want to say like they're doing it wrong. I don't know what the exact guidelines are because that hasn't been completely disclosed by the league. But it kind of just made me think like kind of what your point was. How are you going to then do this like 4-day quarantine once you actually get after traveling, especially if they were to do a commercial. And then how are you going to enforce that? Like, are you literally going to enforce people to stay away from each other for 4? Like, that just seems very, like, no, like people aren't going to do that. Like, these people are friends and like, they're not going to stay in the room all day. Like, I just don't know how maybe they have a really good plan. Maybe people will really take it seriously. But I just feel like if you're living in, even if they have like separate rooms, if they're living in close quarters, like, are they really not going to see each other for 4 days? And like, like we all kind of, I don't want to say cheat with our friends, but like, I was really careful. But then like my cousin came up from North Carolina. I was like, oh, I need to see my cousin. And then like, she was in my house and I was like, I hope it's fine. I don't know.
Yeah. No.
Maybe they take it seriously than I do. I do take it seriously though. So
yeah. Exactly. I think everyone's, takes it seriously, but with whatever adjustments they need to make to stay sane as well. But I agree, like, to say that people are going to sit in their rooms, like, when they get down there for 4 days doesn't seem, like, totally reasonable. I mean, maybe they are, maybe they're going to be strict about it, but I think, like, there's also just, like, the commercial travel aspect of it, too. Like, everyone this week, right, traveling to get to their home markets, so some people live in their home markets, but not everyone does, so commercial travel this week to get your home market, then they're going to start testing, then they're going to all commercially travel down to Florida, do more testing. So like hopefully the testing catches everything early, but I don't know, it still just seems like maybe once you get there and you're there for a couple of weeks, like it's pretty safe, but like the process of getting there seems like high risk.
But seriously, like following up what you said, are all the Connecticut Sun players in Connecticut right now?
So we talked with 6 this week who were. I'm not even sure completely about like Dewana or Kalina, who else? I was thinking through the ones who I like am either checking their social media or like the ones we haven't talked to. Teresa Plaisance, she wasn't one of the ones. There's someone else. Brianne January. Those are the ones that kind of haven't heard or haven't seen anything from.
And do any of them live in these 8 or 9 states that I think that Connecticut has said you need to quarantine for 14 days? So if you're flying from Florida to Connecticut today because you're a Connecticut Sun player, what happens?
That's a great question. And I didn't think about that. I just saw that news, like, what was it, yesterday? I was like, oh, like, that's not good. Like, whatever, 9, 14, whatever amount of states it was. But I didn't think about the sports aspect. Because I do know, obviously, that the individual workouts, I think they began like last week. So some players have already been back or were able to drive back for a few days now. So I don't know exactly how that happens. And that's definitely interesting. I thought we'd maybe hear more for sure by now. Like if certain players were going to opt out of those ones who, like the 6 we talked with through the media, like all confirmed they're playing and that they're going to Florida. In theory, like for example, like Dewana Bonner, maybe she is playing. We haven't heard anything. It's like 5:50 on the day of the deadline, so maybe it's fine to assume she is down. But you just never know in these times, right?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe there's like exemptions for athletes too. I don't really know because there's athletes coming from Europe and stuff too. And technically, I'm pretty sure you have to quarantine for 14 days if you're coming anywhere in the U.S. from Europe right now. And obviously, they're not going to be doing that because they're going to have to get on a commercial flight to go to Florida. So, they must just be making exemptions. For what it's worth, the Connecticut rule is like a strong advisory, basically. It's like, we're not enforcing it, but please don't go out if you've been to any of these places. So,
yeah, well, Kalina's from California. Right. Is that one of the places?
Yeah.
I think that's on the up, but it's not on the list yet. You probably should. Okay.
Because I know LA is having some issues now.
Yeah.
Sorry, who's having issues?
LA. Los Angeles.
Oh, Los Angeles. Yeah, no, I saw a chart that said, like, if you look at the Bay Area, like the San Francisco area, like, they're totally flat. It's like everywhere else in California.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a question. Another question that I had, there's obviously a ton of questions. One thing I saw today, Tom Ziller, who runs the Good Morning It's Basketball, mostly NBA, but he's very supportive of the WNBA and links to articles from, lots of people in the WNBA, including ourselves. It's like, what is a successful WNBA, or he asked it in the context of an NBA season, but I think it applies to any league, MLS and WSL, and more importantly to us, the WNBA. Like, what would be a successful season, and what would be a not successful season? One thing he brought up is if anyone needs to be hospitalized. What do you think?
Are you talking purely like health terms or like basketball too?
I think it was like looking back.
The season's gonna completely like finish, you know? That's like a big one for me. Like in theory, basketball, like they need to finish this season. Sorry, I kind of interrupted you.
No. I agree. I'm definitely the most. Well, I don't know. Certainly, I'm the most cautious of myself and Megan, and it sounds like you too. Probably, we've really not done anything like seeing our cousin. To the quarantine thing we were talking about, like I could see the players. Maybe like I wouldn't be concerned if they were sitting outside. You hear all these stories about like teenagers hanging out in the parking lot, and sort of the equivalent of that, like outside on the IMG campus. But I am definitely think there is a decent chance that we'll have to call the whole thing off. At some point. I mean, I hope that's not the case. I think it's, every player's choice. And I think clearly the vast majority of players, even if we still get more opt-outs later today, because it's unclear whether the deadline's 11:59 p.m. Eastern or some other time. And I've even heard in the NBA context, and so I would guess this would happen for the WNBA as well, that like, it's even kind of a soft deadline.
Right.
We'll see if they get there. So, everyone's got the right to choose what they want. And I think there's no doubt that players are itching. It sounds like all the Sun players that you spoke to are eager to get going. So more power to them. But yeah, it seems like we're getting, maybe it's not the equivalent of March 11th, but it's like close to the equivalent of March 1st. And so even, there's no reason that they necessarily wouldn't call it off, as the facts on the ground change. I think the other main takeaway that I had from all of this, the big piece of news, right, was that the players only got the guidelines yesterday. I think that seems a little surprising, or not really surprising because it's so much work, but in particular, like I'm still not fully understanding how they picked the July 24th date, and like why does it have to be then, right? I think that if they were aiming for later, there'd be more time to digest all this information and sort it out and monitor the situation.
Yeah. I think that's tough. I think in theory, it's better to try and start sooner, like as safely as possible, right? And that end of July date, like some of the other leagues now are like they were either aiming for that or even a little sooner. So I see like maybe why they'd want to do that. And then also because now I guess if you're planning on doing the season with the 22 games, the regular season and the playoffs as normal, you're still going to end around October. I don't know when exactly in October, but it's not going to be dramatically different from a normal season, even though it's consolidated. So that's probably a plus. But I mean, I haven't talked with any players about this because it just happened. But if I'm a player and I only got like the detailed information yesterday morning, like probably not at all. Although I do think it's interesting, like when the media talked with the Sun players, as I mentioned, I think, what was it, 2 of them were on Tuesday and the rest of them were like late morning yesterday. And so it sounds like they had decided, I would assume, without getting all those details, if assuming like what Michelle said is correct and that they didn't read it like first thing before their workout before talking with us, sort of thing. So in that sense, I guess a lot of players probably did feel that the league was doing whatever they could to make sure that they would be safe, and maybe they didn't feel like they needed to see the nitty-gritty. I don't know. I think it's something that it'll be interesting because that's going to be such a huge, and for a great reason, like a storyline throughout this whole process. It's like I think it's really important to cover like what do the players know, what's their thought process when it concerns health and safety, to the extent they're comfortable talking about it, because obviously it's personal, it's personal choices and everything. But I think that's a huge part. I think the players, especially, we talk about this with pros, we can talk about it even too with college athletes. It's a whole different thing, but in an ideal world, they should have as much information they can to make whatever they think is the best decision for them, either way, whether not it's like to play or to not play.
Yeah, agreed. I feel like having the details, right, for people that are on the fence, that would probably like a big difference maker. Not having that told yesterday, if you're already on the fence, I feel like would probably be a big deal. If someone's not as worried about the nitty gritty and they've kind of already made up their mind, it's probably not as big of a deal, like to know exactly how much they're going to be tested and what the like total details are around that. But going back to your question, Aaron, about like what's a successful season look like, I feel like I'll have more faith that we'll have something that resembles a successful season if they can like get through the first like few weeks like without like happily calculating it, because I feel like that's the biggest risk is the like getting there and getting everyone there safely. I mean, there's still
Well,
gonna
like,
be. Go ahead, sorry.
If an assistant coach has to go to the hospital, was this a mistake? I mean, I hope that's not the case, but like that was sort of the question that Tom asked today, which I thought was a really good way to frame it.
Well, it's tough too because there's still a lot that we don't know about the virus and its long-term implications. So I think one of the more harmful things I've seen, and I know this was not to diss on my brothers on live Twitter, but they're like, yeah, if you're like these professional athletes are going to be fine. They're healthy. They're young, relatively young. Like if they get the virus, they'll be fine. But like we just, I think also just because of like Rudy Gobert getting that, I think was he asymptomatic the whole time, or
I think he must have been.
He must have been.
No, I don't think that's true. I think the reason he got tested was because he was symptomatic. I think Donovan Mitchell was asymptomatic though.
Yeah, sorry. You're right, because that's why they were like, he's sick. Okay, right. Okay, now it's coming crazy how that all unfolded. But yeah, you know what I mean? So like we've seen examples of pro athletes who haven't gotten, we don't see them on like their deathbed basically, or we don't see them like incredibly ill. So then that kind of makes up this like false notion of any athlete who gets it is going to be fine. But we just don't know. And I definitely think the concern about the assistant coaches or the coaching staff or whoever else is in like the team party or from the league side, that's huge too. Because like some of those people are going to be either have the like just a health risk or be at that age that it really could be super serious. So it's like, I mean, what happens if someone does get hospitalized? If it's in theory isolated.
Yeah, one person, right? Yeah.
If it's with one person that's really serious, do you proceed? You have a lot. If you're the league, you have a lot at stake, and you're going to want to proceed. Unless they like literally, it's like if it gets to a certain point, then maybe they would shut it down. But it's also like I don't know. It's just I don't envy the decision makers, but I don't know. It's really tough because that's like I mean these are people's lives. Right. These are people's lives.
And they're, the players clearly are making the choice to play. I think that to your point, I think they've had reasonable communication all along the way with negotiations. So to your point, maybe they haven't read the whole document, but they had heard most of it, I'm sure, or I hope, ahead of time. So, and frankly, I don't know if I was in their situation, if like reading the details would make me flip me one way or the other, right? It's probably like, hey, it's way too much going on in there, or like, I'm not too worried about in general because I think I'll be fine. But yeah, my biggest concern actually is the long-term effects, even if people recover relatively well. And I was just rereading Stephanie Dolson's Players Tribune article. Yeah, I think people neglect to comment on just how bad it seems to be, even if you're quote unquote fine. It still seems super serious, and I would like to avoid it. Although maybe for $50,000 for 3 days of anguish would be, I don't know, it's a different question. But I think that like there's real concern. Like we don't know like what happened to her lung capacity. You read all these stories in the newspaper about how they have the ground glass or whatever in the lungs. And again, I don't fully understand all that. But I mean, if Sabrina Ionescu like suddenly has 90% of the lung capacity she had in Oregon for the rest of her life, like that has some significant impact on her career earnings.
Right. And also, like, I know this is not, like, on the totem, on the grand scheme of things that are bad versus things that are not bad, but, like, I also just think the idea of getting, like, very, 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 very sick is, like, very unappealing. Like, that's, again, like, that's not the primary concern. Like, people are dying from this, but that's why, like, I always, when I'm talking with my brothers, I'm like, okay, like, you guys might not, like, because they always are like, sorry, this is now going off on a tangent because my brother's not WNBA athletes.
That's what we're doing here.
Always like, yeah, like, because they always are trying to tell me, like, I'll be fine if I get it. I'm like, well, I also, like, okay, maybe I won't die, but I don't want to get really sick because that just sounds miserable. And then it reminded me of what you said about Steph Dolson's piece. Like, her whole family was so sick. And obviously, if it was just about getting sick and there weren't, like, the long-term effects, like, maybe that would be not as, maybe we were like, okay, well, we just take our chances. But the long-term effects, as you said, are obviously probably the most concerning, and that people are dying for this. And, I keep thinking about, there's a lot of the coaches are a little bit older, and I don't know. I don't know if anyone's like kind of done this yet or written about it yet, but like, cause Kurt Miller, I guess I didn't really, no one's ever asked him like specifically, like, would you ever worry about that? I guess we just assumed he'd be fine, but like someone like Mike Tebow, like.
Yeah, we talked to him. I think he was pretty, he's very media savvy, let's just say. So he did not say, oh, I'm concerned or oh, I'm not concerned. But I mean, what would you think if you could, if the current is willing to pay for you to stay in the bubble for 3 months, like in IMG Academy, would you be nervous about that? Would you happily go? What would you think?
Yeah, well, because of the fact that, they wouldn't actually be able to financially send me, that was like, okay, well, like I don't have to think about that. But there was one part of me that was like, I need to go, like, especially because there probably not going to be a lot of media there. It would be such a unique opportunity to capture that experience and you could probably write a book off of that, honestly, just like what it's like to be in the bubble during this time. But one thing I do think is something, I feel really lucky with the Sun specifically, is I do think they're going to make access pretty easily available. So at the end of the day, when there's health involved, like my personal decision probably would have been like, okay, you're going to be fine with your coverage if you just stay here, and then you're, less likely to get sick. So you should just stay here.
Yeah. What do you think, Megan?
I don't know. I think for me, I should be like more concerned about the health aspect, but I think for me, just like the having to be like locked up in quarantine in like Florida, especially this time of year in Florida, for like 3 months without seeing like any friends or family would be like a little bit too much.
Yeah, I was thinking about that today, actually. Like if you were a parent, like if I was just a parent, I guess the players do this anyhow, but like to relocate and like if your young kid gets sick and you don't have your normal pediatrician and stuff like that, that's like, a whole, there's definitely a number of mothers in the league. And so, they're making arrangements, right, for the caregiver, the kids to be there. But yeah, that's just tough to uproot your family as well, right? If it's the other option is not to see them at all, right? We've seen Avery Bradley in the NBA. He was concerned about, I guess, one of his son, in addition to social justice issues, which he has been advocating for strongly in the last couple of weeks. But I guess one of his sons has respiratory issues, and so he realized that he wasn't going to feel safe having his son in the NBA bubble and opted out as a result. Yeah. So I do wonder if any other players are going to opt out. I guess, were you surprised, Alexa, at how many people have opted out to date? And do you think we'll get more in the next few hours? Megan and I were talking about this earlier.
Yeah, I totally thought there were going to be more. I think maybe I just read too much into I think a lot of people were like hyping it up on Twitter, like basically making it sound like, and it's not like it was that, it's not like it was a bad point, but like a lot of people were like, the league's going to end up just being like all the rookies and like everyone who got cut at the beginning of the, when the rosters were finalized. Should they even have the season? I saw that somewhere. I'm like, well, like, no, they should have the season if they have people who can play and it's safe. Yeah, I guess right now it's, what are we at, 6, 7?
I think it's 7 because I saw Howard Megdal, right, recorded about Becca Allen.
Yeah, that's actually official now too. We did announce that. So, and then, a lot of them made sense, like Natasha Cloud, that made sense. Renee Montgomery, I talked with her the week before for a story and saw, what she was doing, and that wasn't really shocking to me. I guess John Quell, in terms of just like that this could have been like an MVP season for her, and but that she decided for health reasons, it seemed that she didn't want to risk it, which I think, again, like some players seem like they totally respected her decision, and I don't think you can fault anyone for making that decision at all.
Sorry, have you seen any pushback from anyone about that?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No.
Good. I haven't either. I just want to make sure I hadn't missed anything.
Players specifically?
Yeah. I think everyone's been very supportive, both teams and players, about the choices that the players are making.
That I think it was Tiffany Hayes when she announced 2 days ago or yesterday that she was going to be sitting out, and she didn't really specify, but I kind of read it as she wanted to work on like social justice stuff. The first like few comments, like right away, it was like all these other WNBA players are like, we're behind you, we support you. Like Renee Montgomery was there, like, let's get to work. I was like, that's really cool to see that support. Because, you know, I think it does. I mean, it's not like the end all be all per se. Like, I think players should do whatever they feel most comfortable with, but I do think that probably makes it easier. And you don't want to have that kind of like ill will, especially with like teammates and stuff. So I've seen pretty positive responses.
Yeah. Or peer pressure too. I would think there'd be a lot of, right? I mean, the dynamics for Connecticut next year, right, are definitely going to be interesting with John Quell having chosen to opt out this year.
Yeah. It's crazy. Just, I mean, I recorded a podcast over the weekend with Gabe Ibrahim, and we were talking about like John Quell. He, you know, was asking like, "Oh, is this the season where she's going to win MVP?" And you know, we're talking about the Sun with like DeWanna Bonner now and AT, and like just how stacked that lineup is. And now they just, I mean, it's one player, but it's like such a big player who's not going to be there anymore. So it definitely changes the outlook on their season, but I'm excited to see what happens despite it. I'm like very just, you know, curious. It's going to be crazy also too. Everything within 22 games when everything's going to matter so much more, but everyone's going to have that same issue too.
Yeah. Now, Megan, I think we were talking earlier. I agree with you, Alexa. I thought John Quell was going to be the domino and a lot of people were going to opt out. Was that your impression as well, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was, like what Alexa was saying, just, like, so much stuff on Twitter, like, people hyping it up, like, first many big stars, like, it sounded like, they kind of made it sound like, you know, every big name was gonna, like, be like, oh, no, just kidding, which I guess could still happen, but, like, I think at this point, we, like, don't really think that's gonna be the case. I mean, it did, like, what happened this week definitely changed, I think, like, the title picture in terms of, like, Connecticut and Washington, but I think otherwise, like, things haven't really shifted that much from what's kind of happened.
Well, that's a pretty big shift, though. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's a big shift, right? But you still have like teams that were going to be in that picture that look like to still be in that picture. I mean, the Sun, I think, you know, obviously John Quell opting out is probably like a big hit to their potential as a championship contender, but they're probably still a playoff team. They're still going to be good. They're just not going to be as good.
Yeah. You know, one question since we were talking about the Sun, I was sort of joking about this. It obviously was not realistic, but if Alyssa Thomas had known that there was going to be no basketball until essentially July, the first game was going to be July 24th. Like, what is the recovery time for the surgery she's going to need? And like, could she conceivably have gotten it on like March 15th and be ready to go?
That is a great point. Yeah, it's still crazy to think that she'll be playing with her, you know.
How long? It's been like 2 years now. Yeah.
Too long to completely like wrap your head around when you look at what she's able to do on the court. Like that was just, I mean, that was my first, I was obviously like new to covering the team this past season, but then like when the whole thing about like her shoulder like injuries came out, I was just like, I mean, you can tell like she doesn't have her range and she can't really like shoot jumpers or like a free throw, but still, what she's able to do is pretty remarkable. But I'll have to ask her at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to know that. I mean, that's
never looking like. So I know because she was overseas up until I guess March when she had to come back. So that
and they probably didn't have. I mean, I think elective surgeries were probably canceled at that point. But
that's true.
Yeah.
What was the vibe when you've been talking to players with the Sun for the last couple of days? Are they still feeling very optimistic? Do they see themselves in the top tier of contenders?
Yeah. It's interesting because again, like they were all very supportive of JJ, John Quell Jones, just behind her decision and freely admitted, you know, like that's a big loss for them and they're going to have to figure out their new identity without her in a very short amount of time because training camp's like 2 weeks and then they have a 22 game season. And so there's not a lot of wiggle room for error. We haven't talked with everyone yet, but kind of did ask like Bree Jones about it, just like how she's feeling about having to kind of assume like this new role is outside, you know, a bigger role than she probably envisioned a week ago on the team. And actually AT too chimed in on it and they were both kind of confident that she could, this is a good opportunity for her to go in and show that she, deserves to be there. And AT said, I think she called her she was like a monster overseas. And I was actually just writing about this for a story, and I looked back, she had that 58 point, 16 rebound game, something like that. And I think she made a all EuroLeague second team. So it seems like she had a really good, off season in Europe and Prague. AT, kind of backed her up on that, but that's going to be interesting to see how that kind of comes about. The other thing for the Sun too is, they're looking at Bria Holmes to take on a bigger role too, and to start and to move to the 2. So I think that's going to be interesting to see. I know Kurt Miller's always been really high on her and her potential, and especially now that she's passed that first year back from giving birth to her daughter and raising her. So that'll be really interesting to see too. And not to mention their pieces that they brought in, and how Dewana Bonner fits in. I'm very intrigued to I really wanted to see her and Jonquel play together, but we'll have to wait a year. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. And now obviously too, they added Beatrice Montpremier and Jackie is it Gamelos? I should know this. She's Greek. Yeah, so those 2 pieces too, they're going to have to incorporate into the fold. So lots of question marks for them so far.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think they had something crazy, 95% of their minutes returned last year, and then this year it's going to be kind of a whole new lineup. So it's going to be a different team. So it's going to be fun to watch. But yeah, I think also what you said about Montpremier, I think it's going to be a theme, kind of a couple places where there are players that opted out. Some of these younger players that wouldn't have gotten to play necessarily are going to kind of get an opportunity to show that they belong in the league, and maybe have a better chance of getting picked up someplace else next year, or back on the same team next year, because they'll have that opportunity to prove themselves. Right.
Yeah, it was crazy because I literally wrote a story about how basically that draft class, I don't say got screwed, but look at the list of where everyone went, and basically the entire second half of the draft was all waived, or Kaya Gillespie sat out. But some of them will get second chances now. And I think it's also going to be interesting too, what's going to happen because there's still teams that have to add people. Because not every roster is up to 11 or 12 yet. And then obviously what's going to happen with injuries? Who are they? That's another huge question for me with the bubble. If, I don't know, if Jasmine Thomas gets hurt on the Sun, are they good? And they can add someone else. Are they going to, how do you bring people into the bubble?
Yeah, that's a question we had, right? Because I think about, we always talk about 144 spots. I was looking at it, I think 160 or so people played last season. And actually some of them played on 2 teams, right? So it'll be really interesting if someone gets traded and just has to walk across the courtyard at IOG Academy. But yeah, if you get cut, and what happens if you get cut? Are you exiled immediately? Do they let you hang out for a week to see if someone wants to pick you up? Or what happens there?
Yeah. Right. You think, I was envisioning this, side pool of players where they can just kind of pick, teams can pick them up, sign them whenever they need them. Because, you'd think, I don't know. That's I think that's just a huge question, especially because a lot of teams too, are inevitably, it's not like these rosters are going to be completely stagnant. That's not.
No, it never happens. There's always 20 other players that are not on rosters as of, say, Monday are going to play before October or whatever. Yeah, what's going to be the process to bring them in? And then the other question related to that is, I think I asked Megan what she had thought last week about, if one person tests positive a week, which could be 15 players. And we haven't even talked about the fact that we haven't seen who's tested positive yet in the first wave. The NBA is going through that now. But could you medically opt out after you catch it? Could you say, you know what? I gave him a shot, but I've had it. Not fun. I went through something comparable to what Stephanie Dolson did, and I'm out now. I'm tired of it. And then how will that be covered? I don't think we've heard details about that.
Or if you're physically unable to, worst case scenario, what happens if you get it and are still recovering too?
Or even just test negative, won't test negative for 30 days.
A lot of questions.
Yeah, so many questions.
There are a lot of questions. Like I said, we're not going to know until it all really happens. Yeah, I think I saw Gabe tweeted something today, which I was thinking, which is like, we won't really know who's playing until they actually land. It'll be interesting to see how we're going to find that out, since we don't know what the media coverage will be and who they're letting in, right? So, we don't know, right, if you'll be there. Will Michelle Vopel just bunker down in Florida? It's actually I will say, I've actually been to the IMG Academy. I did like this weird kind of basketball camp it was like a mix of people that were in media and analytics to see kind of what they were doing. And so I stayed it's beautiful. It's like a beautiful private high school. So I could totally see, theoretically staying isolated, but like you could go there for camp right now, like the tennis prodigies, because the old voluntary tennis camp, like they can start going as of, I think, Monday, it's the 28th. And so like, how are you going to separate these like 15-year-old tennis phenoms from these WNBA players is another question I have, to say nothing of all the other, sports that they have there. I think that's something I haven't, we haven't seen the details of, but I think it can be done. But I'm very curious to know how many people will physically be on the IMG campus on the day, July 24th. Is it, I mean, I think it's not many WNBA, but will there be 1,000 people there total?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize that there were like going to be other people there. I don't know how I missed that, but that seems just like more variables. I feel like every person you add is like another variable. It's like if it's just the W, and then you just have like support staff that's coming like in and out once everyone's there, maybe your risk's pretty low because like you're probably not having like close extended contact with like support staff, but because the more people you add, the more risk that there is, especially given the situation in Florida right now.
Yeah, I think it's like being on like I said, it's like a super fancy private high school. And so it's not that different than like a college campus or something where like all the WNBA players are in like the WNBA dorm. And so probably, most of the time they're just interacting with WNBA folks, but there are still other people wandering around.
Right. The other question too that this week made me consider with like what happened with the NWSL is how big just like timing is a factor. My understanding, and I know like the Orlando Pride situation is kind of messy, it seems like, but it seemed like the biggest factor with that is that they had those positive tests and they just didn't have enough time to quarantine and go through the proper protocol before leaving for the tournament. And so that's interesting too, because of, what we talked about with like that, you have the 4-day quarantine and you have the testing and you have the, our 2-week training camp that, the WNBA is supposedly going to, have figured out. So maybe it won't be the same issue as they're going to have like more time to quarantine, but what happens if positive tests pop up like close to when they're supposed to, tip off? I don't know. I just think that was like an interesting layer to the issue I hadn't really thought about before.
Yeah, they might. I mean, if people get back to Connecticut or any of these markets and test positive on Monday, then I don't think they'll be able to fly on July 6th, right? Which is the date that Michelle talked about.
July 6th?
July 6th, I believe, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Megan, is a week from Monday, right?
Yeah, it is Monday.
Yeah, no, it's as my wife says, it's Blur's Day every day. But yeah, no. So I think that that's a strange situation all around. It also has the dynamic that I think we had talked about last week on the podcast, which is like at some level it's kind of lame that they caught at a bar. At the same time, like they're following the guidelines in Florida, right? And so it's really weird, for someone like that to be able. I was saying, imagine if then they had to go to Bradenton because they were WNBA players, and so they can go out to a bar in Florida on June 15th, but they can't on July 15th. Like the dynamics of that are very funny as well, assuming the guidelines in Florida don't change. I will say one thing that was interesting. I saw I'm sure other people said this as well, but I saw a female journalist actually sort of comment that like at some level they were a little disappointed that like the women had done this. There was as if like they should be held to a higher standard. I actually think like it's refreshing and good to see that, right. I mean, it's like, as cheesy it is to say, right? Like women are people too, right? They want to go to bars. Just, we hear about NBA knuckleheads and, people that are breaking curfew and, people are definitely expecting NBA players to try and break the bubble in Disney. And I mean, I think the same thing's going to happen. There's less to do. I was kind of looking around Google Maps around the facility. I think there's a not so nice strip mall or whatever, but it's walking distance. But nevertheless, like I think that players break curfew all the time and stuff. And I'm sure some people will just be going so stir crazy that they'll try and get out of the bubble.
Yeah, I think to me the most disappointing thing with like the Pride news was just that like the NWSL has basically gotten like no publicity whatsoever, even though they are going to be the first league back, and then that was like national front page headline everywhere, and it's like it just sucks to see have that be the one thing that gets coverage. But
no, I agree. I'll be interested to see Saturday what happens, right? Because the first game Saturday, Megan, you're much more than I am.
Yep, Portland versus North Carolina Saturday at like noonish, I think, Eastern time. So. Yeah, Jen and I went on like a 5-minute soccer rant on last podcast, so I will save him.
I heard. I did listen. Alexa, do you follow the NWSL much or no?
Somewhat. I think I like follow the main, women's soccer like reporters on Twitter, and I read like some of the newsletters, and I don't have like a team I specifically follow, but I know like the broad strokes. So obviously, was interested in how their return to play was going on. And of course, they took a completely different approach than the WNBA, than a lot of other teams. And it'll just be interesting to see if they can also pull off their season as they've kind of planned it out.
Yeah, the other data point, right, is the boxing. Now they're doing it in Vegas, but they actually have less people than the WNBA is talking about, and they still are having people pop up. I was listening to I think Chris Mannix's podcast, and he also covers boxing, was talking about how they're still having people break the bubble, not really break the bubble, but the virus is getting in, I think is probably the right way to put it. And so, yeah, it's nobody knows. It's going to be interesting. The NWSL, there's also the basketball tournament thing is happening. And I think in Columbus, Ohio, right? The 4th through the 14th. So we're going to have some real American benchmarks to see kind of what happens as far as trying to return to play. Again, I'm pretty cynical, but then at the same level, like I still take solace in the fact that, yes, Donovan Mitchell caught it for the Utah Jazz, but, he was the only other person out of 58 people that test positive. So it's not like it spread like wildfire, in there. Whoever had it first was not a super spreader. And again, right, I mean, as a private high school campus, you can imagine it. There are certainly ways that you could do it that it would actually be it would be socially isolating, but sort of virus isolating as well. And so I could see a world where, if they're not interacting with the support staff, again, the question about how to get the food and things like that is a little unclear to me. But I've been able to go and get takeout without worrying about it. Yeah, well, I worry about it, but without catching anything. So it doesn't seem inconceivable to me that, could actually end up working.
Right.
Yeah. I think not to kind of get preachy here, this is probably like going off a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's interesting that like you see a lot of people that are saying the media like want the coronavirus just to, like be bad. I'm like, no, especially like sports reporters. I'm like, do you realize we need sports to do our job? Because like they could, if there's no sports, then I could lose my job because what am I going to do? So, I mean, it's just when you were saying like you're cynical, but you're basically like hopeful. I think that's like a good way to put it. Not like we don't want anything to happen one way or another. Like we're concerned comes out of concern. We don't want people sick, right? And we want the players to be healthy, the coaches, everyone else to be healthy. But yeah, it's like we want sports back. We love sports, and we hope they can do it safely. And they take I think it's going to be so much of like it's impossible for us to predict what like a month from now is going to look like, or 2 weeks from now, or a week from now. So they're going to be making decisions like as stuff comes up. And so as long as they can hopefully make the right decisions for everyone's safety at the time, then I think that's kind of what you have to ask for in this situation.
Definitely. All right. We've been on for like 50 minutes, so should we wrap it up there? Thanks so much, Alexa, for joining us today. It was great having you on.
No problem. Thanks again for having me. Happy to chat and ask a bunch of questions. And I don't know if we came up with any answers, but we had some good points, I think.
Yep. Luckily, that's not our job.
No, it's always good to just socialize. I think I just saw my wife there on screen, which means it's dinner time at our house. So a good time to wrap it up. But yeah, it's great to see you. Look forward. We should do this again sometime soon. And then, maybe someday we'll actually see you in 3D.
Yes, hopefully someday soon, very soon.
Great. Thanks again.
Great. Take care.